Hi, I'm Larissa Lapani, and I'm the Executive Director of Divine Trust Ministries. And I'm so excited to be here to welcome you today and introduce you to the second installment of the Divine Trust Power Half Hour. The topic of the day today is vulnerability, and more specifically, the intersection of vulnerability and faith. When I first hear the word vulnerability, Dr. Brene Brown comes to mind. And if you're unfamiliar with Brene Brown, she is out of Houston, Texas. She is a professor of sociology. She happens to be a devout Christian, and she has spent her lifetime working in the arena of sociology on topics such as vulnerability. And she defines vulnerability as the cornerstone of wholehearted living. And when I first watched Brene Brown's infamous TED Talk on vulnerability, which, by the way, is the most watched of any TED Talk recorded in any nation at any time, probably because it's very topical for all of us, she started out with a quotation that I'd like to share with you today from Teddy Roosevelt. And it says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." It is my personal belief and my personal knowing in my spirit that we as Christians are all called to be the man in the arena, to be the people who are the hands and feet, who are actually doing the work and maybe not even talking about doing the work. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank Kevin Steele and 1813 for offering us this platform. And we definitely would be remiss not to give a huge shout out to our panel of guests, our distinguished panel of guests. So thank you to Toye, thank you to Anne, thank you to Jenny, and thank you to Garth for sharing what you know and believe from the word and from your lives about vulnerability and faith. And we would really be missing out if we didn't take a moment to thank the founder of Divine Trust Ministries and the author of the book Divine Trust that inspired the ministry, Andrew McDonald, who will close us out today with his take on vulnerability.
For me, vulnerability is letting down every single wall, every single barrier, everything that you fight with in the physical world and in this world that we live in. And it's two spirits that are fighting. It's almost like good and evil. And vulnerability is just placing everything in God's hands, no matter what it is, and leaving yourself completely and utterly being able to be hurt, being able to learn from your hurt, being able to be honest with yourself without judgment. That's the other part about the faith part, about being vulnerable. In this physical world, when you're vulnerable, you're worried about your judgment from other people. But when you're walking with Christ and you have grace and mercy, there is no judgment. It's just you are who you are. And how do you learn from this vulnerability that you put yourself out there for? I fight vulnerability a lot. I always have. And so it had to be almost learned or accepted once I started getting into the word and really following Christ and giving my life over to Christ. Because I am a very probably self-judgmental person. I do take what other people say to heart at times. So to completely let down my guard is not my natural way of being. Some people are like an open book and just, they put themselves out there. I tend not to do that. So it was probably one of the biggest things that I struggled with early in my Christian walk, was truly being vulnerable. I think it's really easy to be like halfway vulnerable, but until you strip it down, and really, really get real with yourself, you won't get that much closer to God. God's not going to draw nearer to you. You have to let down everything and really just accept that your flesh and you've got your spirit, man, and they're going to fight with each other. But if you can just let the spirit part come out and just strip yourself of the flesh and become completely vulnerable, it'll strengthen your Christian walk, and it's much more enjoyable. I would say probably first and foremost, when you become completely vulnerable, you learn how to talk to other people and communicate, and you learn how to really put yourself in their shoes, and you learn to try your hardest to walk in the same grace and mercy that Jesus Christ did. And so when I started becoming truly vulnerable was when I realized my relationships with other people got better. And maybe it was more self-awareness. Maybe it was, also letting down my judgment of other people, because when you strip it down, it can be shameful. It can be completely shameful when you really strip it down. And until you deal with that shame, but also knowing that you've got grace and mercy on your side, you come out a better person. You come out a stronger person. You come out more of an understanding person. And I think your relationships almost right away will get better. People might look at you funny and be like, why are you acting like this? But other than that, it gets so much better. So
it's crucial for relationships. Our relationship with God, our relationship with others, and our relationship with ourselves. And it's worth it when we peel back and allow ourselves to be known and to know. I think it's Benner who writes about that, about knowing and being known, knowing God, being known by God, knowing God, and how we need that in our relationships. And we can't know and be known without vulnerability. So the comfort for me, my faith, is I may try and hide things from myself and from other people, and even kind of try and hide them from God, which seems so ridiculous because, but there's the comfort, right? Because God already knows and receives and invites us to himself over and over. And there's actually freedom when we go, oh my gosh, this is true about me. Bit horrifying, but also comforting because God already knows and is there with us regardless. So I love that. And I think it's from that place also we can have an increased willingness to reveal those things with other people, to spouse, to closest friends. And I don't think being vulnerable with everybody is actually a grand idea, because there are some things that are so precious and private, you be exposed. But I don't think when you're with people you trust and with God, it's exposed, it's being known. And there's a difference in that.
Jesus said that, that we need to, that even a child can understand what he is kind of telling us. And so as we grow up and we get older, we get really kind of sophisticated in our thinking, and we think we're so smart. But at the end of it, the things of faith and understanding and relying on him require us to kind of become very simple. It's not that he can't argue with the most sophisticated mind, but at the end of it, the reality is there's nothing that I can do to rescue myself. I am in a situation where I am absolutely without hope. And that is the reality. So I can create all kinds of images of what it could be, but that's the truth. There's nothing I can do to rescue myself in the predicament I'm in. And so I have to completely let go of myself and anything that I can do and just simply trust him. And so to me, vulnerability is the core of my belief in Jesus Christ. And honestly, that's the reason why I love him so tenderly, is because it was when I was at my most vulnerable, where I was in the midst of dealing with issues that were so way over me, that I saw that what was actually true. I mean, that's the reality of my life, is that the world around me is way bigger than I could possibly handle. And then I saw him tenderly take care of me and tenderly hold me in the midst of all that stuff. And my safety, I found, was simply in him. And so vulnerability gives us the opportunity to let go of all of our stuff and just walk in and be intimate with the God of the universe. Vulnerability means that when I am hurting, I can tell him so that he can heal me. It means that when I'm doing the wrong thing, when I'm doing stuff I'm not supposed to, I've got to be vulnerable and I got to go tell him. It's like the child with dirty hands. It's like, look, I've got dirty hands. We can't get, you wipe them on your shirt, you just make the rest of you dirty. So that being vulnerable and saying, hey, I've got dirty hands, Father, can you cleanse me? Those are all the things that are just core fundamental to having that intimate relationship with him. And intimacy is really, in just a broader sense, is all about being vulnerable with somebody else. You can't be intimate if you got a bunch of walls up. And that's even doubly so with my relationship with Jesus Christ. It's the intimacy with him that brings me to my knees. And it's because I let him into those innermost spots that he actually gets to heal them, because I let them. So I would suggest that vulnerability, especially in the areas that hurt us the most, are probably the way to get them healed. And that's where that freedom comes that he's promised us.
Vulnerability is really hard because I grew up as a very independent person, and I had to depend on myself a lot. Even as a child, I found myself in situations where I really had to put a lot of pressure on myself to make things happen. And so when I met Jesus, I was really afraid to let go of that. And so I had to hold on to a lot and try to control a lot, because it was my natural tendency. And even though I was becoming a new person, I was getting to know him like I would get to know a friend. I didn't just expose myself and jump in 100%. I think some people might do that, and that's awesome. That was not me. I tiptoe baby stepped as I got to know him. And I even didn't totally trust him at first. Some people might be able to relate to that. I was sure, but I wasn't sure. And there were parts of me that I just wasn't willing to fully give over until I got to know him better. So that was hard. That was tricky. I think that as I've grown in my faith and gotten to know him better, I've been able to be more vulnerable and be more trusting and give more of myself and not control as much. Giving up control is probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but it's also been the most freeing.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. We want to thank you for contemplating about vulnerability, and we want to thank our guests for sharing their thoughts on vulnerability and being vulnerable and accepting the invitation. Sometimes our willingness is that key that unlocks the door where he waits. I haven't cheated this week. I don't have the question or the answers rather from our guests regarding vulnerability to seem smart or what have you, but off the cuff I've been told that the topic was vulnerability in our faith. Is it necessary? What's the interaction? And I believe it is the key. You know, the key, at least in my experience, was to admit that I wasn't enough, you know, that I didn't have all the answers. And that's as honest as I can get with that. But it started the honesty process. I think vulnerability, actually, I know vulnerability was key in experiencing freedom in my life. You know, it came by way of failures and one that was life controlling, and that was I was in a self-created prison. I was dying, and I needed help, and others could see it, but you know, until I was willing to admit that to myself and others, I wasn't free. And that act of humility is very healing. It's transformative. It is the first step. And you know, they talk about the steps in recovery and how that relates, but the fourth and fifth step, you know, admitting to admit all of the stuff that we've done that we hold on to deep, and being thorough about it. That starts the process. And then you know, the fourth and fifth step, we have somebody that's trying to help us where we can confess that. You know, some people go to a therapist, some a priest, some a pastor, some a friend, a mom or a dad. But the word says a brother or sister in Christ. That you know, 5:16, James 5:16, when we confess our sins to one another, we're told, we're encouraged to do so that we may be healed. Healed means that you know, we're broken, I sin, I fall short. But that process being thorough, and then it turns into possibly a daily cadence, sets us free and makes us feel so much more whole. We're able to forgive because we understand that we were forgiven and are forgiven. And it's that ability and acknowledgement of feeling free that helps us to love and better serve, become willing to be about others. It creates a level of comfort that allows us to be honest, and that feeling of freedom, that engagement in meaning what we say, and saying what we mean, and not making promises that we don't intend to fulfill, or being very conscious to be obedient to our word. It brings about integrity, and we understand through the forgiveness and the honesty and the humility and expressing all our failures, we become, or we start to not only become but feel like that better version of ourselves, that God created child in us, you know, matures and is birthed and matures, and it actually says that in the word. We become maturing sons and daughters of the Creator, serving the Lord who set us free. You know, He bore our stripes. All of our iniquity was taken out on Him, the propitiation of sin. And it's that justification that frees us to walk in a sanctification process, until we're called home, and it's transformative. It's 180 degrees from what we, learn in the world. We no longer suffer from self-condemnation. We have a self-reflection and a willingness to do better, but we don't have to suffer through the condemnation of thinking we'll never be good enough and we're not worthy, because the truth is, we aren't and we won't. But Jehovah Sidkenu, the Lord is my righteousness. He set me free. Nothing that I can do, and I can trust in that, and I feel love and forgiveness, and that enables me to understand my identity and gives me a purpose today. And I love you guys. I thank all our guests again. A special shout out to Larissa for all the hard work behind the scenes, and Kevin Steele for the platform. But we love you, and have a great